Hello everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be going through another article today of a study from Medical News Today. Well, the website is Medical News Today, but the study was actually done in Denmark. I think this is an interesting one because I'm very interested in all these different diets and people going extreme. Like there's the carnivore diet, which I just learned about, so people I guess just eat meat, and then there's the lesser extreme to that, which is the ketogenic diet, so low carb, but and then there's vegan, which really would be the exact opposite of those two, because you're really eating no meat, so a lot more plant-based proteins and just plant-based food in general. So this one is actually about gluten intolerance and gluten-free, or at least a low gluten diet. So let's start with this. The article, Why a Low Gluten Diet May Benefit Everyone, by Anna Sadoiu, I don't know, remember they're from Denmark, and it was published on November 20th, 2018. Okay, so let's start this off. People living with celiac disease or gluten intolerance opt for a low gluten or gluten-free diet to manage their symptoms. In autoimmune conditions such as celiac disease, for instance, the body's immune system reacts to gluten by targeting the small intestine. So this is totally legit. This is a disease that's diagnosed by a doctor. If you eat gluten, just massive, massive problems and can actually kill a person. So these are the people that definitely, 100% without a doubt, need to be gluten-free. And then there's those with gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivities, and they report that the protein triggers gastrointestinal symptoms even in the absence of celiac disease. So I don't think that these people are necessarily lying. I think some of them might just assume that they're gluten intolerant for whatever reason, because they read things online, but again, doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. So there's an increasing number of people that are adopting the gluten-free diet, even if they do not have celiac disease or gluten allergy, like I just said. But some recent studies have suggested that doing so may have adverse health consequences, such as raising the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Like I said, that this article is from Denmark, and it was done at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. So let's start comparing low and high gluten diets. So this is sort of the study, and this is how they got their data and the conclusion that they got to. So they took 60 healthy Danish adults between the ages of 22 and 65 who did not have celiac disease, diabetes, or any other disorders. So generally healthy individuals. That's a control. The participants adhered to an 8-week-long low gluten diet and then an 8-week-long high gluten diet, respectively, with a 6-week washout period in between. So this, again, allows for control, so you can actually get back to normal, and then they can try that. The low gluten diet had 2 grams of gluten a day, and then the high gluten diet, they had 18 grams of gluten a day, and then the washout period, they had a regular diet with 12 grams. The two diets were similar regarding the number of calories, the quality of nutrients that they contained. However, the composition of fiber differed because the low gluten diet also contained less fibers from wheat, rye, and barley, which are the primary sources of gluten. This actually kind of surprises me because if you're eating a low gluten diet, then you're probably eating less bread and pasta and substituting it with what I would guess fruits and vegetables, which would have high fiber. But anyway, I guess that's what they said. So the researchers examined the changes in the intestinal fermentation by performing the metabolic profiling of urine and monitoring diet-related changes in the participants' gut, the gut microbiome. And then in bold, overall, the study found that the low-gluten diet changed the participants' gut microbiome, reduced the gastrointestinal discomfort, and resulted in a small weight loss. The researchers think that the digestive changes, such as reducing bloating, are caused by alterations in the gut bacteria and function. And a quote from the professor who was running the study says that they demonstrated that in comparison with a high gluten diet, a low gluten diet a fiber-rich diet, it induces changes in the structure and the function of the complex intestinal ecosystems of the bacteria, which reduces hydrogen exhalation and leads to improvements in self-reported bloating. Moreover, we observed that a modest weight loss, likely due to the increased body combustion triggered by the altered gut bacteria functions, the leading researcher adds. Okay, so dietary fibers are key. So is a gluten-free diet good for you? It might be, said the researchers, but the health benefits found in this study seems to hinge more on the quality of fiber in the diet, not merely the absence of gluten. More long-term studies are definitely needed before any public advice can be given to the general population, especially because we find dietary fibers, not the absence of gluten alone, to be the primary cause in the change in this discomfort. So now they're talking more about the fibers. So I actually went back and I read that line about when we were talking about the wheat and the barley. Let me reread it. I misunderstood it after reading it the first time. So it says, however, the composition of fiber differed. The low gluten diet also contained less fiber from wheat, rye, and barley. So they're saying that the fiber differed, but it was not that they had lower fiber in the high gluten diet, because that wouldn't make any sense. So in fact, it's actually saying the opposite, which is what I assumed earlier. So now back to where we were in the article. So by now we think that our study is a wake-up call to the food industry. Gluten-free may not necessarily be the healthy choice many people think it is. Most gluten-free food items available on the market today are massively deprived of dietary fibers and natural nutritional ingredients. Therefore, he goes on, there's an obvious need for availability of fiber-enriched, nutritionally high-quality gluten-free foods, which are fresh or minimally processed to consumers who prefer a low-gluten diet. So essentially what they're thinking is that gluten has nothing to do with it. High fiber is important, and that's really it, which I tend to kind of agree with, because gluten, like you said, is just a protein, right? And where do you get this gluten? Generally from breads. Breads are high carb, low fiber. So it causes a quick spike in your blood sugar level without actually being able to really well control the spike. So it just kind of goes up and goes down. Whereas fruits and vegetables, or primarily fruits, they might have a lot of sugar, but they also have fiber to regulate it. The foods that happen to have gluten are bread. So when they cut out gluten, they're essentially just cutting out bread, and they might be getting these positive results because of the lack of bread, not necessarily the lack of gluten. That's kind of my belief. It's kind of like blaming water for liver cirrhosis because there happens to also be water in beer, but it's really the alcohol that's the problem, right? So that's kind of my opinion. Whatever that might mean to you, but I thought this was an interesting article. There's a lot of information coming out about bread and whether or not if it's bad. Personally, I think it's probably one of those foods that you probably should eat less of. High caloric value, like I said, low fiber, high sugar, especially the processed delicious Wonder Breads that we have. If you're going to have a sandwich or bread, try whole grain because there is more fiber and it's less processed. And that was another word they used at the end sentence. A lot of the gluten-free foods are highly processed. These foods still have to be affordable enough for them to make it. And sometimes the process, no pun intended, to ungluten, I guess, foods causes it to be a processed food, right? That's what happens. And then that sort of alters the food in itself, I think, and strips away some of the nutrients. So that's a huge thing. So this, like I said, this article was interesting. It didn't really say anything that I think most people sort of expected, unless you are one of those gluten-free advocates. But like I said, I think the most important thing to be doing is if you're going to get rid of gluten, you're getting rid of bread, and that's kind of the whole important thing. Not to necessarily get rid of bread completely, but at least reduce it. Humans do need carbs. We are built to run on carbs, but probably not as much as we eat. Not like the huge white pasta with garlic bread and then maybe having a piece of pie for dessert, right? That's a lot of sugar and a lot of empty carbs and empty calories. Now, what do you guys think of that below? What do you think? Are you on any special diet? Are you gluten-free? Do you know anything about it? Like I said, if you're celiac disease, you have to be gluten-free, and that's a trigger, right? It's an obvious point. But an interesting actual fact about people wanting gluten-free foods, it actually leads to a lot more options for those who actually need to be gluten-free, like celiac disease. Like I couldn't imagine 10, 15 years ago having celiac disease and not being able to eat gluten, and there just being no options at all. And of the options that were available, extremely, extremely expensive. Now that the demand has gone up for these foods, the price has gone down because it's more readily available and more companies are making it, which does benefit the celiac disease people, which, you know, it's awesome. It's kind of funny. It's how economics works, so to speak. So, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, leave a like, maybe leave a comment below. Like I said, let us know what you think of this. Just a quick little summary and our opinion on this article. Take care of yourselves out there. Cheers.